My name is Dr. Ben Churchill. I'm the superintendent of the Carlsbad Unified School District. It's an honor and privilege to work for a community that cares deeply about their children and who understand that great schools are at the foundation of great communities. I truly appreciate our district's partnership with our host for this evening, the Carlsbad Educational Foundation. This partnership allows our schools to provide programs and experiences that provide opportunities for our students beyond what state funding can support. This includes experiences integral to our schools like elementary music classes, science days, science Olympiad, or BizTown, or during this critical time, funding for childcare scholarships and groceries for a family in need. Tonight's forum is one example of how the foundation adapts its focus to best serve our students and to support us as we move forward together. And thank you. I'll now introduce our expert panel. First, meet our moderator, Dr. Carol Van Vooren. Dr. Van Vooren is a professor at the Cal State University San Marcos School of Education. She's a former principal of Jefferson Elementary School in Carlsbad and was instrumental in bringing the International Baccalaureate program to this Title I California Distinguished School. Thank you, Dr. Van Vooren, for moderating tonight's discussion.
Thank you, it's an honor.
We also have three expert panelists. First, meet Dr. Allison Estrada. Dr. Estrada is a Carlsbad native who attended Jefferson Elementary, Valley Middle School, and Carlsbad High School, graduating in 2009. She studied human biology at UCSD, earned her master's degree in medical anthropology at Harvard, and her medical degree in 2019 from UCLA Prime. Dr. Estrada is in her second year of residency in family medicine in Chula Vista. Now, let's meet Jenée Peevy. Ms. Peevy is a program specialist, manager of social work services for the San Diego County Office of Education. She has worked there for over 14 years in student programs and services, in support, student services, and juvenile court and community schools. She graduated from SDSU in 1999 with her master's in social work administration, specializing in children, youth, and families, and also has her PPS credential in school social work and child welfare and attendance.
Good evening.
And lastly, we have Scott Schimmel. Mr. Schimmel is president and chief guide of the U School, an educational resource for students, schools, and parents to help youth clarify their identity, purpose, and relationships to build meaningful lives. Scott is deeply aware of the challenges people face when transitioning into the real world. This is why he's invested his time guiding students, athletes, and veterans to discover and write their own stories. Thank you again to our panel, and thank you for joining this evening. I'll now let our moderator begin.
Thank you again, Dr. Churchill. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight with the Carlsbad Ed Foundation supporting the Carlsbad Unified School District. And I'd like to just go over our format for tonight. This is going to be a panel discussing three questions that are related around social emotional learning. In addition, you as attendees will be able to ask questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll be looking forward to discussing your questions, possibly during the session, and certainly by the end. We're saving extra time to complete and answer every question. So we look forward to hearing from you. You can also find some resources that our panelists have organized for you, and they are on the Carlsbad Ed Foundation website. So go to www.carlsbaded.org and you will find those resources. In addition, while you're there, there are many other ways that you can get involved with our organization and the schools. So we look forward to you supporting us in the success of all students. So we're grateful for you to be attending tonight, and we're really appreciative of our panelists for giving their time on this important topic for not only our students, but for the community and actually our nation at large. So I'd like to start with the first question. this first question, we're going to start with Ms. Peevy. Based on what you see in your field, what are your biggest concerns about the social emotional needs of students as a result of this pandemic?
Well, good evening, everyone. I think the biggest concerns currently with our students, our families, and educators are really dealing with, concurrently, we are dealing with two different pandemics, COVID-19 and racial injustice. And now, as we've just learned recently, we also have a state of emergency in San Diego County with the fires going on. So one of the biggest concerns is the trauma that is associated with these pandemics and the effects it has on our students, families, and our staff. Trauma normally brings about fear and insecurities. The fear of not knowing is often most stressful and heightens anxiety. As we know that when we lack certain physiological or psychological needs that are present, these things cause alarm, such as food, housing, financial instability, unemployment, lack of access to healthcare, feeling unsafe, the loss of loved ones. We have racism, protests, and unrest. We also have abusive environments such as domestic violence and other forms of abuse or violence. And then we also have the fact that isolation with social distancing from peers, family members, and school. So as we know that when these needs are unmet, it leads to heightened levels of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, violence, and an increased risk of additional mental health problems, or that can cause existing social, emotional, mental health issues that can become more severe with people that have already had these. Recently, there's been some studies done and some surveys done, and we can see that there are some results of those in the community, in San Diego community, of their unmet needs. And so of those, 71% are not getting food, housing, utilities. They're unemployed. Our unemployment rate is at 25%. We also have 52% of people that are having housing instability. And we also have 61% of those that are in schools, in elementary and high school, that are challenged with distance learning and having access. So we also have an increase in domestic violence rates and other acts of violence that are going on.
I think I'll just jump on that a little bit. I think exactly, what you're seeing in your realm, Ms. Peevy, is very similar to what I'm seeing in mine as well. As the superintendent mentioned, I'm a resident in family medicine, so I care for actually the health of anybody, kids, adults, older individuals, and mainly in the clinics and hospital settings. And what I am seeing, at least in my environment, is exactly what you said panning out. A lot of uncertainty about what schooling is going to look like for kids, whether it be on the part of the kid or on the parent. Oftentimes with kids just starting kindergarten, for example, or a big milestone of starting middle school or high school, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of kind of maybe fear or an unsettled feeling of not really knowing what's coming next. And we are seeing those things reflected in health as well. So, it really encompasses, school is a big part of kids' lives, and health is really encompassed as well in their social aspects of their life, their schooling, their emotional health. It's all really tied in together for kids. So definitely reflected in their health as well, having these new challenges.
Mr. Schimmel, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think I have a different perspective, and which I think is always healthy on a panel. And I don't ever feel the need to repeat what someone else shares. I think Dr. Estrada and Ms. Peevy, they care particularly about those who are in distress, great distress, and I call that intervention. A lot of what we do with our work with schools and school districts is more around, I just call it in the category prevention, helping students think holistically about their entire lives. I certainly care about kids in distress, but that's not my specialty. So I think one thing I'm concerned about is the missed opportunity that parents and educators have right now with students. And to kind of broaden that even a little bit wider, the idea of stress and anxiety, I think I'm trying to reclaim that a little bit and say that those are actually good things predominantly in our lives. So stress and anxiety from a psychological standpoint are actually the things that help us to grow. I think of the stress and anxiety for me getting married, the stress and anxiety becoming a parent, the stress and anxiety of a kitchen leak that we have right now and our kitchen's ripped out. Those are, I mean, crisis moments in my life, in our lives, but those are also the moments where, because I'm out of control and because I have to go and look for resources beyond me, it's when I look back and think, man, I'm so grateful I went through something difficult and hard. So I think in a lot of the collective space, Facebook, parent groups right now, we're so concerned about the stress and anxiety that kids are going through because of these uncertain times and because of how much school's been flipped upside down. But I think the missed opportunity is to have really thoughtful conversations with students about what are you learning about yourself? How are you growing? What are you being asked to do? In what ways are you being stretched? Like, to have those kinds of conversations during this time, I think would be wonderful for students, and that we could all kind of join together and say, what if we use this as a tremendous growth opportunity for all of us? So obviously that's a little bit different than looking at students who are in distress, but I think there's a big opportunity there, and I want to make sure that we're paying attention to that.
And you know what, Scott, you're correct, because trauma also affects people differently. You know, there's a lot of people that have used their trauma in their lives and have been very resilient. And again, when we're looking at providing and what's the addressing issues for students, we also have to look at that, because everyone experiences trauma differently. Some people have past trauma. Sometimes these traumas bring up pre-existing effects, or it could be something new. But we know more of 1 of 4 students have experienced some type of trauma in their lives. But how they respond to it and the events that are going on is what's different. And we need to help children feel safe and increase that level of support. So like you're saying, these different things that are going on are key, that we need to look beyond and have people have, you know, and provide them with those coping skills to make sure that they are able, because you're always going to be faced with some type of trauma. This is just something that's happened right now that none of us ever expected, I guess what you call the new normal. But, you know, you have kids that, you know, miss their friends and their teachers, and, you know, and so they just need to understand that. And sometimes we have to make sure that when we're looking at these things, depending on the household, like, what are they looking at? Like, what are their parents seeing? What's happening in that household? Because those are what's affecting this. That will also affect the students. So the more support and services that we can provide for our students at this point in time, you know, I think you're actually accurately correct in, you know, because everyone doesn't necessarily bottom out just because they go through trauma. There's a lot of people that go beyond and understand and learn from those things. But as educators, we need to understand that kids do need that support. And as they do go back, you know, we need to make sure that, you know, it's been months that we've been in, you know, social distancing and virtual learning, and kids are still doing virtual learning. And we want to make sure that our elementary students, kids are going to still be at grade level. But we also want to make sure it's, you know, it's equitable for all of them, because we know that some people don't actually have access. We also know that for our secondary students, I mean, for some people, you know, in the beginning, I'm sure when this all happened, it was grandioso, like, hey, I'm not in school. I know I have a 14-year-old freshman, and he was like, oh, he was great with not having to go to school, you know. But then they start to experience the loss of their sports. Like, you know, sports have now been put on hold, and, you know, kids didn't do proms or graduations or clubs or, you know, and things like that. But there were a lot of things, you know, that were virtual that happened that made people feel like, hey, there's still some good out there despite what we're going through. But we still have to recognize that everyone doesn't experience the same level, and their coping mechanisms aren't the same. So having people that are in their lives to provide that necessary support and engagement will help those struggling people that are struggling, families that are struggling financially, that are trying to figure out, you know, how do I work? How do I teach? How do I get access to online? We need to make sure that our kids are still going to be able to have those things in place along with. So I think that's where, you know, the concern is at this point in time, where parents are struggling with, how do I work? How do I teach all at the same time, even though I want the best for my kid, you know, and so we just want to make sure that we know that many students will be held back due to some of these inequities of access and services with school closures and social isolation. So we don't want that to continue, because there's already been a lot of inequities in schools due to, you know, access to certain things. So we just know that this pandemic has caused many great challenges for our students, and that schools always provide structure, and that these months of loss is what we're figuring out to be the new normal. And for some students, we just want them to get back and to understand that it's okay to experience these things, like you said, and have this trauma, but let's figure out how do we help them get back to understanding how to cope with that in the future.
I'm glad you brought up the sports idea. Of so many students are missing out, whether it's sports or performance or band, whatever it is. And there's a lot of identity, obviously, that comes from that. There's being a part of something, there's belonging, there's connection, there's purpose. Like it organizes for many students. Practice organizes their life, and it gives them a reason to get up and reason to eat healthily. And so in the disorientation, I think that's important to name, that students are experiencing disorientation, and there's some lostness there. And I think we as parents have the same loss. Like, we're not spending Saturdays on the sports field with our friends who we travel to, you know, games and tournaments with. But again, the opportunity then is to ask different kinds of questions. Where do you find your identity? Who are you if you're not an athlete? Who are you if not a performer? And those are just really healthy questions, because sports end always for us. Performance typically ends at some point. So asking those questions early. And I think as parents, I want to keep my kids from harm and out of harm's way. And that's just a gut level instinct. But it reminds me, a couple years ago, my son, I have 3 kids, and my son had, we had created a system where if he needs something signed before school, he needs to do it the night before. So sure enough, here we are, it's 5 minutes before school starts, and I had not signed it because he hadn't asked. And I'm in the shower getting ready for work. And so he's pounding on the door. You have to sign it. You have to sign it. I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get in trouble. And I just talking calmly back to him. Hey, buddy, you know, we told you 50 times. But inside I'm thinking, I don't want him to go to school and get in trouble. I don't want him to be in harm's way at school. What kind of dad would do that? But the thought occurred to me, and I ended up yelling at him as he walks out to school, mad and fuming. I said, I'm going to teach you this lesson now, so you don't learn this lesson when you're in college. Like, you got to get your stuff together. And I think back to this idea of allowing our kids to go through circumstances that are difficult and straining. It's hard. It's hard to do that. And yet we can, of course, pray and hope and step in when they are in harm's way, if they're being bullied or something harmful is happening to them. But other than that, it's a different posture. We walk alongside them and try to hold the tension and be empathetic and say things like, that sucks, this is not easy, and just help them feel validated and they're not crazy, and allow them to make sense of this on their own.
Wow, this is a great conversation. And Dr. Estrada, did you have anything else to add at this time? I see you nodding. Okay, so I'm really hearing some great suggestions for a range of students here. And I hear the word resilience coming up. So I'm just wondering from any of our panelists here, how can we build this resilience? You gave an example, Scott, of just, you know, letting them test out, but some of our students are challenged for resilience, and some are challenged for struggling. And so, you know, how are we reading our kids? How can they explain to us what they're feeling? What kind of words can we teach them? How can we learn more about how our students are feeling? Anybody can unmute and respond.
Well, I was just going to agree with Scott. I have 5 kids, so they're all different. And so, you know, a lot of parents, you know, when we're looking at ways of trying to figure out whether it's our kids or educators, we have to look at each person as an individual and find out the unique ways of that person, because they're, you know, everyone is, like I said, I have 5 and they're all different. So no matter, they were all raised in the same household, you know, so you still have to find out what works, because what makes one angry doesn't necessarily make the other angry. And what's, you know, a struggle for one is not necessarily a struggle for the other. And so it's the same with all of us as individuals. We all respond differently, and we all have resiliency factors based on how we, you know, we have been able to deal with the coping mechanisms that we've been gifted with. And so part of role modeling as adults is helping to role model and to bring about those resiliencies and those coping mechanisms to students, you know, or our kids, because of course, they're not always going to have the favorite teacher. They're not always going to have the favorite boss. And so we all, in situations that we have now, we need to find out what that means and what ways are they acting out, and how is that, and how do we help them to build those coping skills along the way. So encouraging, you know, setting those limits, you know, I understand, Scott, you know, I've had plenty of days where the paper is left on my bed, you know, after I go to sleep, and I'm like, okay, wake up in the morning and here's your paper for me to sign. So I think it's all about figuring out how we need to work with each individual person, and I'm sure there's other signs and things. I think Allison.
I think part of that too is thinking about building out in your family emotional vocabulary, enabling your entire family to grow, and your ability to share and talk about what's going on the inside. And to Ms. Peevy's point, every kid's different, every parent's different, and there's of course generalities with genders, and some of those are helpful and sometimes not. But I think it's helpful to do a couple things. One, it's to model, like you're saying, for kids, because parents, we get frustrated, irritated, annoyed, disappointed, and our kids watch us have reactions. Now, they watch us do things, and some of the ways in which I respond to my negative feelings are probably healthy, and many are not. They often, if I'm honest, watch me numb things by turning on Netflix or grabbing a drink or complaining about something. Like, those aren't necessarily productive ways. So I'm more and more mindful of that I can model for them how to say things like, I'm feeling so frustrated right now. So modeling language, and then it's for kids, whether your kid is 6 years old or 16, I think we all need to grow an emotional vocabulary. So one really simple thing that's in all of our hands, or most of our hands, are emojis. And emojis have this, it's like we're going back in time to use symbols and symbology to express ourselves, but there's something helpful there. And if you've ever been to therapy, you've probably been given like a smiley face chart of like, can you describe which feeling that you're having? And I remember when I was in college, someone handed that to me, and I said, well, I've got a lot of feelings. I get angry, I get sad, I get hungry, and sometimes I get happy. That's about it. And this older guy said, are you kidding? I mean, there's so many other ways to express your emotions and what's going on in the inside. And I think it starts with that. And then as parents, I think and I've learned this having 3 toddlers, when my toddlers are having big freak out moments, I've noticed that what doesn't work for them is to look at them and say, what's wrong with you? Or go to your room. It seems to last longer when I don't acknowledge and validate what they're going through. What seems to go better is when, let's say my daughter, her shoe is not tied well, and she's just freaking out. And I want to say on the inside, come on, like, I don't have time for this. You can't keep doing this. But instead, I get down on her level and I say, oh, that is so frustrating, isn't it? It's so frustrating. I mirror back, literally my face looks like her face. And there's some wonderful things happening in her brain at 6 or 16, or with your spouse, or with your friends, or your coworkers, to mirror back and say that is. And so you're helping release some of that energy inside them and be able to put it in a more productive place.
I really agree. I think the modeling is key, very key. Hard, I can't imagine how challenging, but modeling is really key. And I think one thing I've kind of been thinking of as we think about this is one of my mentors in anthropology had talked to me about the idea of resilience as this, like, we just bounce back from things, or, you know, we kind of come out unscathed, versus the idea of endurance, where you kind of recognize this is a challenging time, this is an adjustment, you name it, you call it for what it is. You open the space for even a little bit of grieving of, hey, yeah, you have lost your sports team, or hey, yeah, now you're not in a class with all your friends. Recognize it, and then you're able to say, okay, so now what, right? So it's opening that space, that transition zone for now, what do I want to do? And one of my favorite things to do, actually, when I have a kid, really at any age, you can kind of adjust this, is to do what I like to call asset mapping. It's not unique to medicine at all, but just making, essentially, you put the kid at the middle and you say, okay, what are the assets that we have around you? So you think about, you know, little or big things, whether it's people in their network, or it's skills that they have, or they're really good at interrelational. Oftentimes we'll have a teenager, usually they'll be like, I don't know, I'm not good at anything, or I don't have any skills, or there's nothing really I like about myself. And then you kind of start thinking like, well, you had told me you really like art, for example, or something like that. And they're like, oh yeah, well, actually I'm kind of good at that. Oh, I have a good friend over here who supports me. And pretty soon you've got a paper full of things and ways to support this child, this human, right? And so kind of, at least, you know, whatever age they're at, bringing them up and say, yeah, this may be a hard time for you. This may be challenging, calling it out and saying, all right, now how are we going to build something new within you, with your network around you that still exists, that may be different, but still exists, and move forward.
Thank you for those ideas. They're so strong and practical, and we're able to implement them right away. And I'm thinking a lot of our families have children not only young, like you do, Mr. Schimmel, and of a big age range like you, Ms. Peevy, but you know, maybe some that are high school, middle school. We don't know their age, and certainly each age level has different social and emotional needs. And I'm wondering if any of you could address maybe something specific to an age level, or something that might help parents if they have, let's say, a middle schooler, you know, or the different age levels that we all have between K through 12.
Yeah, so as a parent, I have 2 middle schoolers and then a second grader. And, but my work has been for 20 years with high school and middle school students. There's something that happens around 13-ish, I mean, plus or minus, depending on the kid. And, but they wake up, their brains wake up, they start becoming self-aware, and really it kind of manifests itself in self-consciousness. And you remember that, we all remember that middle school year or years, where all of a sudden you realize people are looking at me. It's a little bit that emperor with no clothes on effect. All of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, people are looking at me, and they're looking at my face, and I'm different. I'm looking around everywhere else. And what starts happening, I think, there's questions that come up. And the problem for parents, I think, is kids start pulling away from their parents, and really all adults. And their primary sort of source of life and identity from their parents isn't there anymore. And that can be really unsettling. It's certainly a big problem in my house right now. But what they start doing is looking towards one another. And it's ironic, I think, that you start wondering, who am I? Do I have what it takes? These big, huge, like almost spiritual questions about yourself, metaphysical questions about yourself. And instead of looking towards the people, your parents, that could probably give you some really good answers, you don't listen to them for a while. And instead you look at your peers and say, can you tell me who I am? Can you help me figure out if I have worth or value? And it's like a really bad idea, just a really bad project. And so you see students get really disoriented in that, trying to find an identity, trying to put something on that fits for them. And I think as parents, we get to watch our kids try different styles of music that they're into. Oftentimes kids at that age will quit something that they've been really into for a while, all of a sudden, and try something else or try nothing. And as parents are watching, trying to figure out what is going on, I'm concerned. But what we can do, I think, is to let it happen, is to keep that, like, let the leash go a little bit longer and recognize that there are significant shifts that are happening. And I think what we can do is be consistent mirrors for them and continue to speak back the truth, because they don't get a lot of truth necessarily through social media or from their friends. And if they do, it's a pretty shallow truth, like, nice shirt, you have cool style, I like what you post on Instagram. It's not really to the depth of what they're looking for. And, but yet we can keep having that voice. You are lovely, you are lovable, you're worth it. I mean, you have talents, you have strengths. I think you're smart, I think you're interesting. All those sorts of things that we can be consistent during those middle school to high school years. And those of you who don't have kids that age yet, you know that's coming. So what does it look like for you to get prepared for it? And I know for me, I think my wife and I are trying to backfill an identity outside of being parents with little kids. So we're leaning more than ever, or more than a long time, on peers and peer relationships and friends, and getting families together that we trust and have shared values with, so that our kids are with their kids. And because I do think who your kids spend time with shapes who they become. And you should be concerned. You should be checking up on who their friends are and getting to know them and spending time with them, and inviting them over to your house, obviously, when appropriate. So there's a lot there, but I think that's maybe a good place to start in terms of what the shifts that are happening at that age.
I would just like to say I agree with you, Scott, but we also have to remember that it's important to always keep in mind that our students, our kids, they're all coming from unique backgrounds, needs, cultural experiences. And we have, you know, grandparents raising kids. We have single parents raising kids. There's a different host of things that happen with, you know, like I said, I have 5, and I at one point had them all the way from preschool all the way going into college at one point in time. Luckily, I only have one high schooler left here. However, you know, so we have to recognize that there's not one set thing that's going to say, this is for, okay, K through 12 or K through TK to first grade or whatever. We have to understand, we have to meet people where they are at that time and their experience in their life. And so what that looks like for them might be a conversation, you know, building some type of rapport to find out what that looks like for those different students and building those coping skills. So it's really hard, you know, to say, we know that kids have experienced this, and what it means to lose sports for someone is different than what it looks like to move, you know, to miss their prom. And sometimes the prom or the graduation is more for the parent and not the student, you know, and some kids that are not really outgoing anyway, this isolation may be okay for them. So we have to always remember that it's unique to each person and their demographics, their upbringing, you know, and again, their cultural considerations when we're looking at trying to provide the supports and recognizing. And we also don't want to bring, a lot of times we bring more trauma to people by some of the questions that we ask or things that we do versus letting them work through some of the things that they need to, and making sure that we're not overly, you know, overly being that person that's over them. Because right now, a lot, you know, even for parents and students and staff and everyone, educators, we're all dealing with trauma, and we're all dealing with trying to figure out what are we doing right now? And we're all isolated. We're all in one room or one house and trying to figure out how do we access the internet to make it work, and how do we teach our kids at the same time. So I think when we look at it, I don't necessarily look at differences between versus, you know, our younger students. Of course, they may still be a little bit moldable. However, I mean, it depends on that elementary student. That elementary student could be, you know, a kid that's been on, you know, walking themselves to school since kindergarten, and really more so than a student that's been getting a ride that's in the high school, to school every single day. So they've learned to wake themselves up. There's different aspects of it. So I know in the world of social work, we look at the environment and the person in the environment. We meet that person where they are at that point in time, and then figure out what are the resources and things and what are the skills that they need, that we need to offer them in order to get them to where they need to be.
Thank you for that information. And it's great to have this variety of panelists and to really hear from where the two of you who are in schools really can give some suggestions for parents here about their children. And as we're looking at that, I'm also thinking that we've got this kind of language that Mr. Schimmel was talking about, you know, when we're talking about how we meet the needs of each child and how they could all be, and probably are, all extremely different, you know, finding that way to have them express themselves so that we're not guessing or imposing our ideas on them, but really showing empathy and care and good listening skills so that they can help us to better make a plan for them and see what support we can give through this time. And now we know in Carlsbad, you know, the kids are doing online learning right now, and that poses its own challenges with older kids having the computer on all the time and, you know, trying to complete their work where there are other kids in the family and negotiating for different computers and other interruptions, and maybe the parents working at the same time, you know, dogs barking, all kinds of things happening. So do you have some advice for these, this particular situation, the home learning, and maybe some coping strategies for everything from losing your Zoom for 10 minutes while the teacher's taking roll to, and actually that happens to teachers too, all the way to, you know, not understanding assignments or feeling behind or not feeling included. So any suggestions there from our panel would be appreciated.
Gosh, I can share some things that we're trying to figure out with 3 kids at home, and obviously different grade levels and certainly different academic needs and personalities slash ability to take care of themselves, manage themselves. My wife has been amazing at creating space, the right space for them. So each of them having their own space. I've been the tech person in the family. I can't tell you how many times I've Googled Zoom settings and how to log into things. And we're in the Poway district, so we've got some unique challenges for how to log in. And all day long, one of our kids is crying in the other room. Why am I logged out all of a sudden? I'm sure every parent watching this can relate. I think what my wife and I have been trying to do has been to laugh. And I mean, we're doing a lot in terms of routine and rhythm and having the right resources, but we just kind of keep looking at each other as I'm trying to work and I'm on a call and we're doing a panel like this, and there's kids crying in the other room, and my wife just keep looking at each other like, this is kind of absurd. and whatever episode we're in, we hope it's not a whole season like this. But so far it feels like it is, and hopefully it's not going into season 2. But these are the days of our lives. This is just kind of absurd what we're trying to deal with right now. And every day there's 5 moments at least that are beyond us where something's not working, something's not working out. And it's almost like, what else can we do besides laugh about this? We're kicked out of our house. We don't have a kitchen right now. I mean, it's just like, sure, we're going to pick up a puppy right now because we bought it like 3 months ago, and this is the date. We've got no kitchen. We're out of our house. We're getting the puppy. Okay, here we go. And in the midst of school. And I don't know. I think laughter, that's something I learned from my family growing up. My grandfather is saying, you've got to laugh at life or else you won't make it. And so that kind of reverberates in my ear quite a bit. Just laugh at this. And it's not funny, but unless it is. So that's been working for us.
Definitely. Laughter is the best medicine for sure. I think one thing I've seen from a student or a child that came in for their well child check with me, and I started talking to them about their schooling and new challenges, something that came up was one, that the parents both work full-time jobs. And so he's kind of left at home to fend for himself a little bit. And while he's very independent, you know, a lot of this is new and right, like Googling skills, I'm sure kids are way better than us at it anyway, but it seems like a full-time job in and of itself. But one thing that he had come up with was, when I asked him a little bit more about it, was that he couldn't turn in his math homework because he only knew how to handwrite it. He didn't know how to type out the equations and all the funky signs and things. He just couldn't figure it out. And even though he had done it, he didn't get credit for it. And he ended up getting a D in his math class in a middle school grade, and which was, you know, I was worried about it, knowing that that kind of stuff can follow you and make it more challenging in high school and, you know, thinking and beyond. So when I brought his mom back in the room with the child's permission, we talked a little bit about, you know, these are unprecedented times for kids and for parents, and it's okay for a parent to want to advocate for a student in a way of saying, hey, you know, by no fault of my kids, he couldn't figure out how to turn in this homework. You know, what else can we do to, or preemptively say, hey, when you have issues, come to me, or, you know, let's figure out a system so that we can get you in touch with the right person, right? Like kind of thinking outside of, okay, who are my resources? If not me, who? And then, you know, even getting more in touch with the teacher and saying, hey, he struggled with this. What is another way that we could, you know, how can you teach us how to do this? And it's probably new for teachers too, honestly. They're probably thinking like, man, how am I going to do this? So knowing that it's new for everyone and that we're all beginners, it's hard to be a beginner. It's very hard. And it's hard. We all want to just be an expert already and be pro. And that initial stages, those frustrations and all those things that kind of come out of the woodwork, you know, you can laugh at them or you can get pissed and cry. But I think, you know, whatever reaction you have, noticing that reaction and saying, okay, this happened. Now, where do we go? How do I advocate for my kid? Thinking that hopefully this is just a brief moment in our lives and we can look back on it and say we grew. But that, you know, we took a minute to try and find a way forward to advocate when these things get real tricky and real minutia. All the minutia is really real struggle. Yeah.
Yes, like both you guys said, I also believe in laughter. So laughter is also good medicine. I believe that'll help us get that. I think a lot of times we just need to really, you know, we need to notice what's going on. And a lot of times it takes a conscious effort to that because we're not used to, you know, kids are normally in school most of the day, you know, and so, you know, at this point, it's like, what are you really noticing? You know, what are you observing? You know, are there different things that, is there, you know, and if it's, you know, sometimes kids do, you know, they have a hard time talking with their parents, you know, because normally you don't have that. And you've got this day and age where everybody wants to come to the table with their cell phone or whatever. So, but they may have someone that they can talk to, but there's other ways that they can engage with others that can provide support, you know, for their, you know, their challenges that they might be coming up with. But one of the things we want to ensure is that as long as they're having that good laughter, I mean, mental health is critical to a child's success in school and their life. So, and that goes for all of us, you know, because, you know, I really truly believe in self-care, but I mean, research does show that students who receive social, emotional, mental support will achieve better academically. So it's basically how do we provide that to them, or how do we provide that as far as their parents and making sure that people understand what their kids need. And, you know, every parent, I mean, cares about their kids. So it's not a matter that they don't, it's just a matter of that these tragedy things happen and all of a sudden everybody's going, oh my God, what do I do? Okay, I've got to be a teacher now. I can't get the internet on. I can't do all these things. So, but still, as long as students feel connected and they feel like they're well-being and they feel like they're safe, they're academically will succeed. And so we just need to make sure that we're connecting, whether it's by parents or educators, that we're making kids feel safe and secure through communication, through laughter, through things that we're doing at homes, making sure that even though we are in distance learning and social isolation, that we still can take time to do things as family and that we're all in this together. You know, everybody's in this together. We're all feeling a different way and feeling crazy some days and overwhelmed and frustrated, but we have to think about the positives and what, you know, establish those positive relationships and decisions to make sure that we're making our kids feel positive and not necessarily watching everything that's on TV, which is, of course, a lot of negativity. So we want to make sure that we continue that laughter.
I will add a few other practical tips if we have a moment. Just from a health standpoint, some things that I recommend to parents and kids themselves at any age. A regular sleeping schedule is really key for just keeping kind of steady brain chemistry. If you're going to bed, I have a lot of kids who are going to bed at 11 or 12 because they're up playing video games late at night, and then they wake up at 11 or 12 in the morning, and then they're eating, and their sleeping schedule is all kind of jumbled up. Can be really challenging to adjust and change, especially when it's like, I don't have to get up for school. Why can't I stay up until midnight? But I think incentivizing a regular bedtime, even if, you know, bargain a little bit if it's a little later than usual, but keeping it, you know, 9:30, 10 o'clock, something, so that they're getting at least 8 to 9 hours of sleep, depending on the age of your child. And then, you know, trying to think ahead about, okay, how are we going to feed? I know, you know, making meals is a huge ordeal for lots of families. And so thinking about, you know, it's okay if you order out every once in a while because it's, you know, the stress on the family and you don't want to push yourself too much, but thinking about, okay, if I have a chance on Sunday afternoon, let's think about how I'm going to have healthy snacks around for my kid. Make sure they're drinking plenty of water instead of reaching for chips and soda. Keeping really well hydrated and keeping people moving around. Also too, trying to cut the screen time. These are all just, feels like a laundry list of more things to do, but I think that the little breaks we can give ourselves from the screen, we usually say no more than 2 hours of screen time for a kid, but now with distance learning, it's like, well, that's kind of out the window. So thinking about additional screen time on top of that, of the video games, of the movies, of all those other things, and say, hey, you know, wear a mask, go outside, play 6 feet away from the neighbor kids and run around and, you know, do what you got to do, get your endorphins up, get some vitamin D. Those are safe things to do, getting exercise and making sure that you're getting some air too, because it can just be really stifling being in 4 walls all the time with the same people. So kind of mixing it up a little bit and making sure that you're staying safe. It's safe for kids to wear masks above probably about 2. So most school age kids can wear masks and actually do a really good job of it, better than some adults actually. So, you know, those kinds of things I think are really safe for kids to do and a good thing to keep in mind really for all of us to stay healthy and give ourselves the best chance of normal brain chemistry as we go through this time.
Thank you, Dr. Estrada. And we just have a couple minutes left. I don't know if either Mr. Schimmel or Ms. Peevy have a few last minute words of advice or a tip, but now would be a great chance.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I know it's, you know, I know it can be frustrating as a parent because you want to set those time limits, you want to set the schedule, and you want to, you know, and so depending on your kids and depending on, you've got teenagers and they're all like, well, why? I'm not really going to school anyway, and I can't get online anyway. So, I mean, so you still want to set appropriate limits, but it's probably not the greatest time to try to ban a lot of stuff, only because it will cause more stress and anxiety, but explaining to them and talking to them about why the importance of it and letting them know that it's about your future and you know, we don't, you know, so it's again, we're looking at patterns of behavior and how kids are dealing with certain things. So we want to make sure that we don't stress ourselves out as parents, more so because kids are dealing with that. They are trying to figure out, you know, how they're going to financially take care of themselves. But you got some of that weight is on the kids. I know high schoolers that are trying to find jobs so they can actually help their parents financially pay rent. So, you know, so we got to keep a lot of these things in mind. And my biggest component is about the importance of self-care, not only for our students, but for our educators and our parents. we need to make sure that we are eating good food, we're getting enough sleep, as Dr. Allison said, and that we're exercising. I go out and walk every day, and that we're having social connections that we can do, that we can social distance ourselves and make sure that we're, you know, in support and interacting with family and friends, whether it's social media. So.
Yeah. Do you have 30 seconds?
30 seconds. There we go.
I think there's, because we're talking to parents, there's a couple things that have been really helpful in our family and other families. There's simple things you can do as often as you're together, whether that's in the car or at mealtime. And one of them is a simple gratitude exercise. We call it 3 good things. And we just go around the table every night, and it's always our 7-year-old who reminds us to do this. And we talk about the 3 good things that happened today. And every single time, every single meal, I do not want to do it. Half of us do not want to do it, but every single time we do. And afterwards, we, number 1, connected with each other, and 2, our perspective shifted about the day. And it's almost like we've relieved ourselves from stress, and we feel like, I can kind of breathe again. There's been some good stuff happening today. So that's one. And the other exercise we do, we call it happy and crappy. And you can use whatever language you want in your family, roses and thorns, whatever, but it's kind of a riff on the 3 good things. And we just want to give our kids a chance to say, what didn't go well today? What sucked today? Just name it, and let's mourn and grieve and get mad for each other a little bit and support each other. And again, the same thing, it's like, it just relieves a lot. So those are 2 really simple things you can do that are actually fun and can do a lot for mental health.
I was gonna say practice gratitude, that we should definitely making sure we're practicing gratitude and looking for the positives and talking to our children about what people are doing to be kind, helpful, and supportive. And just making sure that we're not jumping to conclusions and that we're all in this together. So.
Well, I'd just like to thank our panelists for tonight, Jenée Peevy, Scott Schimmel, and Allison Van Vooren, who've really given us some great insight into the needs of our students and families, and some great tips and hopefully some promising practices for us all to be engaged in. So we're going to take a short break and turn this over to our CEO. When we come back in about a minute, we're going to be answering some of the questions that you've called in with. So I look forward to having Michelle Ginn give us some information at this time.
The golden rule on Zoom, unmute yourself, right? Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Carol, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Michelle Ginn. I'm the CEO of the Carlsbad Educational Foundation. I'm also the mother of 3, 2 who have graduated from Carlsbad Unified School District, and my youngest, a senior at Sage Creek. The foundation is so pleased to present this panel webinar as a part of our Move Forward Together campaign, launched in response to the COVID-19 health and economic crisis. The education and well-being of every student in our community is of utmost importance to all of us. I work with a dedicated board of directors and a team to ensure that your investment in the foundation provides enriching educational experiences for every student, kindergarten through graduation. Our foundation, like so many others, was hit hard this year and has put our over $1 million annual investment at risk. Therefore, valued programs in STEAM, music, and innovation, like music classes, science days, robotics, and more, in need of your support. During the economic crisis, we have adapted to meet the needs for groceries and childcare scholarships for families facing financial hardship. Your support is needed now more than ever. I'm grateful to share tonight that in just the past few weeks, 4 very valuable community members like yourselves have made commitments of $10,000 each to help ensure that our foundation can continue to support our schools and our students in all of these impactful ways. The generosity of these donors and support from you is needed. Every dollar and every donation counts. If every household in our community were to contribute $25 tonight, we together could provide students with elementary discovery labs, innovation support, visual and performing arts programs, and scholarships for students facing financial hardship. Your support ensures that our students can receive this critical support during this challenging time. Join us today as we move forward together. Thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over to Carol to finish up with our questions.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing here with some questions from the community. One question here says, are there community mentor programs that Carlsbad utilizes? And I realize none of you, well, I'm not sure. Let's see where we've got some answers. Mr. Schimmel.
Yeah, I'm aware of at least one thing. So we've been a part of it for a while, sponsored by the city of Carlsbad. It's called this Carlsbad Student Leader Academy. I think it started in 2016, happens typically twice a year. And it's almost like, imagine a citizenship academy for teenagers. So this is specifically for high school students. You have to be a resident of Carlsbad, I think is the requirement. It's free to student, free to a family. And we run a pretty robust program that includes a mentoring component. That's one thing. I'm sure Boys and Girls Club is active, and there's probably from the district, there's other programs that are happening that I'm just not aware of. But I think it's important. I think mentoring is something we can do, and it can be simple, and it can be impactful on both sides, to the mentor and to the student. So I would love to see that happen more often.
Thank you. I see a couple of questions here about students coping with anxieties. So this particular one says, how do you help children or students cope with anxieties they might have developed from being isolated from peers and others outside of their immediate family? It says they are too comfortable with staying home versus making efforts to reintegrate as we open more establishments.
I think this is a great question, even just for adults, right? Of what does it look like to go to a restaurant again? I don't know that, you know, in the near future, I don't know what that I'm ever going to feel comfortable doing that, you know? So I think the first step is really recognizing that that's probably normal given the situation. And that's, you know, as kids are learning and developing and growing, and they're seeing this huge part of their lives where, you know, they're being taught to act in a certain way. And I think, so in a way, modeling is really important. And so as things, you know, we're not quite yet at the time where things are back to normal, right? But modeling a new normal. So saying, you know, what does it look like to be safe? And then when you do things that are within the what you've defined as safe for your family, that you say, no, this is great, this is fine. You're allowed to really be yourself and be free in this capacity, right? And kind of helping them define those limits, especially for younger kids. I know with much younger kids, even like putting things in hands and mouths is a skill they're trying to break. So, you know, at different levels of saying, you know, what is safe, and then when you're in that safe zone, like really let it rip, like really have fun, really let yourself loose. And, you know, as those boundaries naturally shift and change with the change in the pandemic, hopefully we'll get back to a sense of more normalcy.
And I would just add, you know, everything you're saying is correct. I think you have to remember that kids feed off of the adults, and so in what they hear and the things that they're going to. So as long as we maintain positive attitudes, you know, we learn what those triggers are that's making them anxious, because there's a lot of things that make people anxious, and helping them to understand what that looks like. You know, again, being positive, you know, getting enough sleep. I mean, so when they're, you know, just getting out in the atmosphere, but learning so that they can understand what those coping skills are when we deal with stuff like this. Because, you know, the anxiety comes from, oh my gosh, you know, the news is always about this or that, and how many cases, and oh, school's not, you know, so they hear all the negative, and that builds a lot of the anxiety that people have, and people are just overwhelmed. And, you know, and it's the adults are overwhelmed too, because everybody's trying to figure out if I'm going to go teach or I'm not going to go teach or whatever. So I think really just trying to take care of yourself, get into that positive place, looking at those things and being able to talk and having those conversations at dinner, whether it's happy, crappy, or whatever it is being able to feel that you have someone that you can sound off to, and that you guys can still find ways to enjoy yourself even during this time of these different pandemics or unprecedented times that we're going through.
Thank you. I also see a few questions related to time in front of the computer screen, whether it's screen fatigue from school, homework, and socializing. I also see computer screen gaming, looking for some ideas of how to keep kids focused for their classes, and also how to safely include some exercise or ways to reduce screen time. So any ideas there, just jump in.
Yeah, lots. Kind of is just going to depend on your child and what their strengths are, what their likes are. But I think really breaking up the school day, allowing for those breaks, and actually, you know, I experience screen fatigue on the regular, and I think we all kind of do. And so you can kind of get sucked in, and you don't actually realize the world is still happening around you. And so it can actually be hard to want to make that transition away. So it kind of does have to be, it can need to be artificial for some students. And so whether that's saying, if your kid is like a sports type person or a dance person, it's, hey, let's put in an awesome song, you know, every hour, every 2 hours, you pick the song, and now you get up and dance, or teach your little brother a dance move, or whatever. Having an active time where you're actually, you know, moving your muscles and getting oxygen to your brain is super important. We actually know that for obesity and diabetes risk, it's about the amount of times you stand up during the day. So allowing a kid to stand while they're looking at a screen, or, you know, just being kind of creative about what a kid can and can't do. So sitting, you know, having just sitting at a screen like this all day is not only bad for their brain, it's bad for their health. So saying, okay, let's get up, let's do other things. Food breaks are a big one too. So not eating right in front of the screen, and trying to, you know, break up, okay, maybe for dinner or for lunch, eat in, you know, by a window, eat outside, do something a little bit different, take the dog for a walk. And even sometimes people set timers on their phones or something like that, where every hour or two it says, you know, hey, time to get up. And whether it's just that you walk around the house or go to the bathroom, then you know, drink a glass of water, you've kind of broken up that cycle. It can be hard, but I think it's something worth at least trying to. And if you try to do it 10 times a day and you do it 5, okay, that's great. That's 5 more times than you've done in days prior. Kind of giving yourself credit for the little things you do too, because it's hard to make new routines.
Thank you for that, Dr. Estrada. Appreciate it. We also have a couple questions here from parents who have children with special needs, students with disabilities. One with a mom with a son that's diagnosed with ADHD and mild autism, how to keep them focused and motivated during this time. And also it says, how can distance learning be more accessible for students who are challenged by executive functioning skills? Anybody have a response for that? These questions? We don't have our special.
I would say I work every once in a while with kids with autism or with severe ADHD, and really I would just say you're not alone in trying to come up with strategies. I want you to kind of think about just how we did asset mapping for kids, do an asset map for yourself of thinking about, okay, you know, is there a pediatrician, someone that you can rely on for help? Do you have a learning specialist in your group? And even asking your physician too, saying, hey, you know, is there a learning specialist that I could be put in touch with? Or even, you know, behavioral health as part of your care team, just kind of building up your own strategies, because it's, you know, it's a lot, it's taking on a lot of, you know, kind of trying to make you're doing the job of many people. And so, you know, reaching out to your other resources to make it a more complete team, I think would be really crucial first step.
And I would say, I mean, making sure you're reaching out to the district, because the student already had a special education or an IEP plan. Definitely there are resources for students that have special needs and disabilities, whether it's community resources or if they were already on special ed. And I mean, it is definitely challenging right now. And I know with a lot of schools are looking at bringing those students back first because of the challenges that they have and the extra needs that the extra resources and support that they need. But I would definitely make sure as a parent that you're calling and advocating on behalf of your child, because, you know, it's really hard to really give you, I mean, there's, like I said, there's resources for, you know, different community resources, but if there's a particular plan that your student has in the school, I mean, reaching out to the school counselor, or if they have the school psychologist, reaching out to them and saying, how can I get more support? They would have a list of resources and supportive services, maybe even people that could come out to the home to be able to provide those supports. So, but reaching out to your school district supports for their educational purposes is key.
Thank you. Well, we have a few minutes left, and I have one last question here, and this is about families who maybe have been disrupted during this time, maybe moving, separation of parents, or some sort of work change, or also kids who are home alone. So some suggestions on how to have students know that they are still connected with family in certain ways, or that there is some place where they can connect, or some kind of way of monitoring or giving that, that sense of belonging to students.
Maybe I'll speak quickly to the first part of that question of someone who's going through a significant shift and change in their life, divorce, move. I think there's obviously a lot there emotionally underneath the surface, because changes like that aren't just the changes, it's all the transition, the experiences that you're feeling. And so having a space to talk about that, name it. And I think the hard part for most families is you still got to do a lot of stuff. You got to work, kids got to go to school. You can't just sit around. So I almost like the idea of having an appointment with that every day or once a week, like a family meeting, or, hey, let's just do 20 minutes to check in. How are we feeling about all this? That's a simple thing to do. But I also would add that as parents, what we can offer to our kids is like almost like chapter headings for who we are as a family. And just to develop some language, if you haven't already, to say, you know, this is what we believe in. And you just kind of say that phrase a lot, like, this is hard right now, but we're the Schimmels and we never give up, or whatever that phrase would be for your family. Those things have a way of like going pretty deep into kids and their hearts and minds over the years. It's something that they can return to. It's almost like sacred scriptures if you're a person of faith. And if you are, you can use sacred scriptures specifically to say, hey, this is what we're going to cling to during this time when so much is disorienting and confusing and out of control. Remember this, remember what we're going to cling to as a family. And I think that can actually anchor for your kid. They can turn to you and say, are we going to be okay? Which is their big question. Are we going to make it? Are we going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? And if you can give them an answer that you believe, you don't have to always believe it, but to repeat it again and again, I think would be really useful for your kids.
I think also, you know, sometimes, you know, as parents, and I mean, I think it was alluded to earlier, you know, kids get to a certain age and they break away from their parents, you know. They used to kiss you goodbye, and then all of a sudden you're driving to school and they don't kiss you goodbye anymore. So we also have to figure out, you know, we know our kids best and how they are, and maybe there might be someone else in their life that they have that rapport with, that they can have the conversation with, or, maybe you have to find a different other type of supports, counseling, or something like that. But normally when a person has a good rapport with someone, they can probably have that conversation with them and find out what's going on and be able to let them know. Because a lot of times when you're dealing with a lot, if your family's already having a lot of different stresses, you're going through it, it may not come off because now you're stressing and now it's an argument between. So again, what Scott said is the ideal, but a lot of times when we're under, we may not say what we want to say because we're under so much stress. So looking for that person, another person that person may have a connection with, that they feel safe enough to talk about what's going on and being able to engage in a conversation. And then maybe you can figure out from there, what is some of the strategies or some of the services and resources that you might need for that student or your child.
I agree. I think I just want to touch on the aspect of the question. It was kind of a big question, but there was a part in there about safety, about kids being home alone during the day and what does that look like. I think it really depends on the stage and the level of maturity of the child, obviously, but it is a big concern. I think if you are leaving a kid at home during the day, hopefully they're of, 6th grade, 7th grade, middle schoolish type kids. And one thing I just recommend to parents who come in and are saying, I'm having to work all day, what do I do? Usually they're really frustrated with their kid, thinking that, they're never going to, do what I say when I leave the house. As soon as I get the kid alone, the kid's oftentimes saying like, I don't want to do anything bad. I just don't really have any I don't really have any guidelines of what I should and shouldn't be doing. And I just get bored or, kind of having loose and undefined expectations, I think can be a little bit of conflicting messaging for children, really for anyone. And so if you have expectations for your child, it's usually, I think it's very kind to be clear about those and say, hey, let's have a conversation about what you expect from me and what I expect from you. And in order to keep you safe, for you to have a safe home environment, XYZ, whatever it is that you think, or you say, hey, by the time I get home, I'm really hoping that, you can show me one thing that you've done and we can talk about it together and celebrate that, right? So kind of using the attitude of creating something like at the beginning of the school year where you come up with like the class rules that seem kind of petty at the beginning, but actually are really important. You can always turn back to those and say, hey, this is what we decided together was going to be, for your safety during this time or for you to have a good learning environment. I think it's useful to address for sure, because then a kid can say, if you come home and you say, hey, you weren't supposed to do that. And they're like, well, you never told me. That's fair. So if you, setting expectations verbally is really hard, but it's important.
These have been some great questions from our audience, and I really appreciate our panelists coming forward with their experiences and their knowledge and their training to put some information out there, hopefully some good tips that actually from the comments, I'm seeing a lot of thank yous, and I appreciate the work that the panelists have done. People feel more informed and they're very appreciative of this time together. So right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle Ginn with the Carlsbad Ed Foundation.
Thank you so much. I just want to say a tremendous thank you, Dr. Van Vooren, for being with us tonight, and also to our panelists, Dr. Estrada, Scott Schimmel, and Jenée Peevy. Truly appreciate your dedication and commitment to our greater community and our families and students. I do want to share that I've been receiving messages, and I think one of the things that really struck a chord tonight I wanted to share with you is there's just been so much discussion about our differences and our perspectives that tear us apart, and tonight's conversation really brought together our collective experience and the challenges that we're all facing, and was somewhat sort of therapeutic for everybody to talk through that. So thank you for taking us through that experience. It truly was valuable, and people really appreciate your time and attention to this. So I do want to share that all of our panelists have shared resources with us, some additional tidbits, as well as links and connections and resources available in our community that you can utilize. And those will be available on our website. So we encourage you to visit www.carlsbaded.org to learn more. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you so much for tonight.